So I have had a number of problems with the films in the X-Men franchise due to a serious lack of faithfulness to the source material. Thankfully, I'm glad to say that Wolverine is the X-Men film I had the least amount of problems with, and I did enjoy it quite thoroughly. After the events of X-Men The Last Stand, Wolverine has become a vagrant lost and detached from society until he's sought out by Ichiro Yashida, the man whose life Logan saved at Nagasaki in 1945. This now powerful businessman seeks to repay this debt to Logan by absolving him of an unending life via his mutant healing factor. Regardless of consent, Wolverine is left physically vulnerable by secretive forces as he attempts to protect Mariko, Yashida's granddaughter and heir to his empire, from the Yakuza and a band of diddly ninjas. Wolverine is now pushed to his physical and emotional limits as he confronts not only lethal samurai steel, but also his inner struggle against his own immortality to emerge more powerful than ever before. So anyone who was put on guard from the really bad X-Men Origins Wolverine film that came out a few years ago, the first attempt at a solo Wolverine film in this franchise, you need not have to worry. This film goes in a completely different direction, completely different style that is very appropriate for the character of Wolverine. And even then, it still feels like they probably kind of disregarded X-Men Origins Wolverine from continuity because if you haven't saw the film, at the end of the movie, you find out why Wolverine has a certain amnesia in the other X-Men movies. That he doesn't remember things from his past, where he came from, all these things. And he gets an adamantium bullet shot into his brain, and that erases a number of his memories. Well, in this film, he remembers things quite clearly from 1945, where X-Men Origins took place in the 70s. So it feels like they might have kind of say, let's forget about that film as much as possible and just do our own story and not be hindered at all by that film. So that's a good idea, and I don't begrudge them doing so. And director James Mangold has a very unique kind of filmography. He does a lot of different genres, but he's done some good films that I think are really worthwhile. Copland was a fantastic piece of work. It's got Stallone and De Niro and Ray Liotta, and a lot of great talents. It's a real tight, good dramatic thriller. Identity was a great, taut suspense thriller. Great, smart thing with a lot of great cast yet again. But he's done stuff like Night and Day, which is a big action fluff piece type of film. But in The Wolverine, he delivers. And he sets the right tone right from the beginning of the film. He doesn't go along the lines of a lot of these other superhero films where it's just like, we gotta hit you action right at the beginning or we feel like we're gonna lose the audience. He sets this thing up where it's investing you with the characters, the mindset of Wolverine, where he is at this point after the events of X-Men Last Stand, where the X-Men are disbanded, Jean Grey's dead, he's haunted by her memory, and you follow Wolverine along in this very, not so much slow, but deliberate pace, methodic pace, to where we get to a point where once the action happens, we're invested in these characters and we understand them and we can feel for them, that we can feel the danger and the peril. We don't just get action for action's sake. We have action that is built into the plot, built into the characters, where they're going and what's happening to them, and understanding all this sort of twisted web of things that are going on. And Hugh Jackman does a great job in this film. I think this is probably the best portrayal of Wolverine he has done yet. Physically, he looks fantastic, raw. He's got that lean physique where it just looks like this raw animal. And he really gets into the depth of the character in this film. Where a lot of other films are just more presenting the characters like this action hero type of guy, just going out slashing, going berserker rage on everyone. This film gets into the depth of the mind and the heart and the soul of Wolverine, as he's a fractured man at the beginning, but the journey he goes on, getting invested in Mariko and all these other characters, really starts to mend him, puts him back together, becomes more invested in people. He begins to care again. He becomes a hero again, someone to fight for, something to fight for. And Hugh Jackman does fantastic work. And this film, aside from one part, I thought there was one weak link in the film, which I'll get to, but on the whole, this is a great, solid cast. All these actors from Japan, all these Asian actors do a fantastic job with these characters. They feel real, dimensional, solid, grounded people that they don't feel like they're towing a line. They don't feel like they're just picking up someone else's slack. They're all holding their own very solidly. But the one thing I felt that was a little lacking was the sort of femme fatale Viper character. Just didn't have the substance, because everyone else has got a lot of deep emotions and motivations. They're all personal, interwoven ideas and agendas that they have going on. Viper is just a hired gun that's kind of there to be a little cheeky and just kind of it's just not a compelling character. It could have been a better character that they've written in there. I don't think it's so much the actress's fault. It just doesn't feel like the character really fits properly into the style and tone of the film. But on the whole, this is a great cast. I love the whole thing with Wolverine and Mariko. Kind of getting I didn't feel like the filmmakers were trying to develop a romantic relationship. I didn't feel like they're trying to make this a loving couple type of thing, that there was a great romantic interest, but it's very personal, it's intimate, it's more tender. It's not something that feel like they're going to fall in love and go on this great romantic adventure or something. It just feels like Mariko is the person that's bringing out the human being inside of Wolverine, bringing out that heart, bringing out that humanity back out of the creature that he's become, this reclusive, solitary figure. And I feel that that's what the real heart and core of the film is, that these two characters connect. It makes Wolverine care about someone again, gets him invested, and pulls him away from the haunted memory of Jean Grey, and puts him back on the path that he needs to be in life. And when this film does get to the action, I think it's really damn good. Even the bullet train sequence, which didn't seem too convincing in the trailers, ends up being a very dynamic, exciting sequence. Even though there's a lot of CGI involved, obviously, it's just such a well put together sequence. I think it's the best action scene of the whole film. And apparently there's probably going to be like an unrated extended cut on Blu-ray, which is unfortunate because you don't really get that real great sequence of Wolverine battling ninjas like you really want him to see him do it. There's some footage in the trailers of that, but it's not ultimately in the film. But Mangold has said that he's probably going to have a more bloody, violent, extended cut on home video, which I'd be anxious to see, but it's unfortunate we don't get that in the theater. But there's a lot of great action in this film that it doesn't feel like it's over bloating it, because there's a lot of films I've seen like the last year and a half that have been like, it just piles in so much action that they sacrifice plot for it. And this thing's the opposite, almost the opposite way. It's got the right balance between the plot and the action. The action serves the plot, and I love that. I don't feel like this is a superhero film that's got to throw big action sequences at you all the time. It's a much more grounded, more personal story. So the action services that. It doesn't get all big and gigantic. It makes a film that feels grounded, feels good, feels dramatic, it feels poignant to the characters involved. And it's not just Wolverine's story. You've got Yukio, who is this, builds kind of kinship with him because they're been down similar roads in their lives. And Mariko, obviously, she's the one who brings out that humanity in it. And then there's all these kind of more treacherous, seedy characters who are kind of like don't think they have honor, but they don't have honor. Wolverine has honor, and he shows them what it is. And when Wolverine finally gets back on his feet, gets fully mended and everything, the scene that he has whipping out the claws and fighting the guy with the samurai sword, that's one of the best fight scenes of the whole film. And Marco Beltrami's score, which is fantastic all the way through the film, I think it's one of his best, most diverse scores. In that scene, it just punctuates the moments just right, where it feels like a heroic moment without going over the top. And there are some problems that I do have with the film, because in the film, Wolverine has his healing factor sort of repressed, disabled. He's not healing. He's getting shot, gunshots, everything. He's bleeding out. He's not healing. He's wounded. And while it's handled very well in certain ways, it makes him more vulnerable, which services the story a great deal on the emotional level. There is a problem that he keeps whipping his claws out, which break through the skin. And he never bleeds out, because there's an example. Back on X-Men number 25 in the 90s, Magneto ripped the adamantium skeleton right out of Wolverine's body, and it forced him to bleed profusely. And this is the moment where we ended up seeing that he had bone claws, that the adamantium wasn't part of the Weapon X program, it was an organic part of his body. And you saw in the following issue of Wolverine this, bleeding profusely out of his hands when he whips out the bone claws in the next issue of Wolverine, which feels like, I understand that they couldn't have him walk around bleeding profusely in a PG-13 movie, but it's also an inaccuracy. It's something that didn't take me out of the film, but the more I think about it, it's like, that's a stinging point there. They don't try to address that in any way possible, because if he's constantly ripping out the claws and breaking the skin, he should be bleeding out somehow. There should be bandages on his hands at least, because they even show that later on in this comic that he's got his hands bandaged up, and you don't really see him bleeding because he keeps trying to opening and closing them, just trying to keep the channel clear so when he needs them, you won't bleed out so much. But that's one of those things. And then there's a thing of, the film has a certain amount of humor. It has a serious story, but it's able to keep some levity in the film. It has a nice balance up to a point where in the first half of the film I feel the balance is just a tad bit off, that they have that right, nice, solid, good balance, and then they kind of push it a little more over the edge with something that just feels extraneous, an extraneous bit of humor that didn't need to be there. But I understand it. But also, if they element that didn't need to be there, that could have been saved some screen time for like fighting with some ninjas. But regardless of that, this film is very well done. I like the story. I know there are people who are saying like the last act of the film, the last 20 minutes or so, kind of loses them, and I can see that, but it didn't do it for me. That the last act, where you'll see in the trailers that there's sort of a robotic silver samurai, and I won't spoil anything further, there's a little more involved with that, but people say that part of the film kind of lost them, but it didn't lose me. I felt very much invested in what was going on. They did a lot of great and surprising things in this sequence that affected Wolverine in very, like I said, unexpected ways, that I'll be anxious to see how they resolve these sort of things as they go on into the X-Men Days of Future Past, where, again, there are continuity issues abound in this franchise, especially with X-Men First Class contradicting a lot of the established history and timeline stuff established in the first 3 X-Men films. So it's going to be very interesting how Bryan Singer and his screenwriters and everyone else resolves those issues in a time travel based scenario where they're linking the two continuities or whatnot together. So we'll see how that works out. But the Wolverine, I think, is a very solid piece of work. I think it's a film you definitely should go out and see. I'm seeing people, there's not much reason to see in 3D. There's nothing really visually stunning that would be enhanced by a 3D experience. And you can go out, you can go down below in the description, get a little more insight in my review. I got a couple other things to get into, like some of the characters I really like, get a little more in depth with the characters. A lot of the performances, I thought there were really some characters in this that I really, really liked. And you can just read more about that. But on the whole, I would give Wolverine a really solid recommendation. If you wanted a rating, because I know someone requested it, I'd probably give it maybe like an A- or an A. Not an A+, not quite perfect, but it is really damn good. You should go see it, have a good time, give it the time it needs. Don't sit in there and think, oh, well, it's not getting me to an action sequence. Sit there, enjoy it, get involved with the characters, get involved with the story, because it's a very well executed film that deserves your time and attention. So that's all I got for you this time. I don't know when I'll be back next time, but eventually you'll see me around on this YouTube channel. So later.